Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will get started on today's episode where we will be talking to one Trish McMillan. Trish holds a Master's of Science degree in Animal Behaviour and is a certified professional dog trainer, certified dog behaviour consultant, and associate certified cat behaviour consultant. Trish has been involved in the animal rescue and sheltering world since the mid-1990s, starting out as a volunteer and working her way up to Director of Animal Behaviour. She worked for the SPCA for nearly 8 years, first as Director of Animal Behaviour at their New York City shelter, then as a behaviourist on their field team, helping assess and rehabilitate dogs from cruelty cases, dog fighting and hoarding situations. She then joined the Shelter Research and Development team. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Trish McMillan to the show today, who's patiently waiting by. Trish, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to come and hang out with us here at the Animal Training Academy. Thank you.
I am so honored to be invited, and I will apologize in advance for any animal noises that may happen. I am in a 160 square foot tiny house. I think that's 14 square meters with 5 animals right now, and it's just after dinner time, so.
If you could see my screen, everyone, it's like I'm interviewing three dogs and a cat who's consistently patting Trish on the shoulder with her paw, which is extremely cute. But let's dive straight into the first question today, Trish. Could you please take all of the listeners back and share where you got started on your journey back to the early mid-90s and even earlier than that, and share where you first learned about positive reinforcement, animal training, and if you could be so kind as to tell us some stories from that time as well, we would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. I was, as all the bios of animal trainers say, I was always the animal person in the family. I always had quite a menagerie of pocket pets and dogs and cats, and eventually got a horse of my own, and I always leaned towards the cookie side of the fence. When I was training my dog to do tricks as a child, he knew so many tricks. My younger sisters cleaned up in the fall fairs in the pet dog trick category, and I would take leftovers from dinner, or I would take some of his kibble, and I taught him a million tricks. So it kind of surprised me when I took a training book out of the library and they said, put a choke chain on shaped like a pea, and if he pulls on the leash, give him a good pop. It was like, I'm doing quite all right with leftover pancakes here. And it was kind of the same thing with horses. I didn't have as much formal education as many people did, so I always kind of had a carrot in my back pocket, and every time I hopped on the horse, I would give him a carrot, and I had the only horse who didn't take off when you put a foot in the stirrup because he was anticipating a carrot, and it just seemed obvious to me this is how you would get an animal to do what you want. I did get chastised by the horse people are way harder to convince to use positive reinforcement, but the results kind of spoke for themselves. So I did some dog training classes. With the first dog I got was in the early 90s. Actually, I went to the shelter in the late 80s to get a dog, and I said, I'm a student. I'm about to finish my undergrad degree. I'm going to go work on a horse farm this summer. I'd like to get a dog now. My roommates say it's okay. And they said, oh, we don't adopt to students. You're going to, and they asked, are you ever away from home for more than 4 hours? I'm like, well, sometimes, but there's usually a roommate around. Oh, we don't adopt to people who are away from home for more than 4 hours ever. I'm like, who do you adopt to? The idle rich and the homeless? Like, who's not, who never goes away for more than 4 hours once in a while? So I just thought, okay, well, shelters and me are just not a match. So when then I moved to British Columbia, and I got my first house of my own. It took a couple years. And I was finally able to get a dog. I decided I'm going to buy a dog from a breeder, and I read all the breed books, and I'm a horse person, so I decided I wanted a Dalmatian. And I just lucked into an amazing breeder. I knew nothing about buying a dog from a breeder, but I wanted a dog who could keep up with the horse, and I wanted a friendly-looking dog that wouldn't scare people off, and which will surprise people, knowing that I have Dobermans and Pit Bulls now, but... My first dog was a happy, waggy Dalmatian who was super smart and super social and loved people and loved kids. And I spent 13 years apologizing for her and saying they're not all like this as she's kissing babies. Like, I've put a lot of training into her. I got a really good one. They're not all like this. Because they do need a ton of exercise. They're very high energy dogs. And they're not all as people social as the one that I happened to get. So, I did obedience, I did agility, I did therapy dog work with her. And when she died in my arms in 2005 of old age in the vet's parking lot, I thought, this could have been a shelter dog's life. If they had taken a chance on a student, this could have been a shelter dog's life. So when she was a younger dog, I had her at the vet, and the vet said it was the mid-90s at this point. The 101 Dalmatians movie had come out, and the vet said, oh, yeah, they euthanized a bunch of Dalmatians at the shelter last week. There's just so many of them now. There's not enough homes. And I just freaked out. I thought, I have to do something for shelter dogs. Here I am with this beautiful purebred dog. I don't even want to step foot in a shelter after the way I was treated. But I have to do something. So I signed up to walk dogs, and that got me into training other volunteers to walk dogs. And before you knew it, I was spending as much time at the shelter as I was at my day job, and it kind of sucked me in. And that was 1995, and I have had one foot in the shelter world, sometimes both feet, and sometimes up to the eyeballs, ever since then. So it kind of stole my heart. And it wasn't just Dalmatians I worked with. I learned to love all kinds of dogs. And the cool thing about volunteering in a shelter is you get to work with dogs that you would not meet anywhere else. There are dogs who are there on bite holds who are not going to make it out. There are dogs from hoarding cases. I took a female from a hoarding case home with her 9 puppies and raised the puppies in my sunroom. So I got to meet really, really interesting dogs. I got to learn some very cool skills. And when I met a foster dog that I couldn't fix, I started apprenticing with the trainers in town, and that led me to moving to San Francisco, which was just going to be for about a month, which led me to volunteering at the San Francisco SPCA, which led me to getting to know that whole group, and I got to meet Ian Dunbar and Kelly when they were doing Open Paw over in Berkeley. So it was a very cool time, the early 2000s, to be in the Bay Area. There were a lot of amazing trainers working there at the time. So I just went to every trainer I could and downloaded as much as I could from their brains, and went to seminars and conferences. And, as a Canadian working in the Bay Area, my visas were always just a little bit tricky, and I was always on the verge of, every time I crossed the border to get a new H-1B visa, they might decide not to let me in. So I thought, if I had a master's degree, I could work wherever I wanted to. So my undergrad degree is in fine arts, so I'm like, well, they're not going to take me into animal behavior with drawing and painting as my majors. So I called up Dr. Sophia Yin in Davis, which is a couple hours away from San Francisco, And I said, can I take you out for lunch and pick your brain? And she graciously let me take her out for sushi. And I had a poodle under the table in a stealth poodle bag the whole time, my little toy poodle. And she was just so gracious. She gave me a list. I wrote down on a little piece of paper all of the undergrad courses I would need to get into grad school for a master's in animal behavior. And I just worked my way through them over the next couple of years. And I was lucky to get into grad school in England after that. So that's a convoluted way of saying that I've kind of always leaned towards the positive reinforcement side, and I was very lucky to meet a lot of amazing trainers early on in my career who also leaned very heavily to the positive reinforcement side, and I kind of felt like I'd found my people. And that's what I have been doing since then. After grad school, I got to work for the ASPCA.
I love the whole casually ringing up Sophia Yin and inviting her for lunch.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
She was amazing.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, she was just so wonderful. And I do try to pay it forward when people ring me up and say, how do I learn to do what you do? I try to channel Sophia because that was such an influential meeting for me.
Have similar meetings with Sophia Yin been for other guests on the Animal Training Academy podcast show over the years as well? When you said that you're right at the start of your answer to that question, that your journey was probably the same as others, what I thought you were going to say was you started using aversives and then you read Don't Shoot the Dog and then your life changed. But that's not what you said.
Yeah, well, I did read Don't Shoot the Dog, and I did...
as a young girl?
No, I was not young when it came out, sadly. And I did, I read Blanche Saunders as a kid, and I tried the choke chain thing. And when I took classes with my Dalmatian, I had to leave the cookies in the car and go in and put the martingale collar on her. And so I know how to do that. But then I'd go home and practice with my cookies. So when I read Don't Shoot the Dog and The Culture Clash and all those books at the time when a lot of us. It just confirmed how I had felt for a long time, and I was pretty happy to leave the choke chain behind.
So I'm curious, I think your story about going to the shelter and being told that they don't adopt dogs out to anyone who's going to be away from home more than 4 hours, what really struck curiosity in me there is that you then shied away from shelters for a significant amount of time.
Well, I did. I mean, I bought my dog from a breeder, and it sort of took a casual comment by my vet to guilt me into going back into shelters. But once I did, and I saw how much one person could do, like one determined volunteer can really change a lot at a shelter.
Well, this makes me think about people who get turned away from positive reinforcement because they have a unpleasant experience with a positive reinforcement trainer. Ken Ramirez was sharing stories with us about that recently. He shares about it in his most recent book, and he shared it with ATA members in a web class recently. I'm curious if that story that you shared with us is a lesson. Did you get lessons from that story that you still kind of shape you today?
Yeah,
This question has been butchered, probably the worst of any question's ever been butchered on the ATA podcast show. What did you learn from that you still use today is what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think the take-home lesson from sort of following my heart as far as how to treat the animals is something that I tell to my clients all the time. I get a lot of clients who have been through more aversive trainers before they meet me, and what I tell them right up front is, if I or any other trainer ever tells you anything that gives you a feeling in the pit of your stomach like, ugh, I don't think I can do that, I want you to tell me right away, and we will find another way to do it. Like, there's always more than one way to approach a behavior issue, and if you're uncomfortable with anything I'm saying, we will try to find another way. And that has, I think that really helps me get buy-in with my clients. I think many of them have been guilted into doing things to their dogs that they didn't want to do. But if I give them permission up front, and then of course it's like and give him a cookie for this and give him a cookie for that. And let's try to counter condition him to the things that he's afraid of. I very rarely have somebody say, oh, I can't do that. Sometimes it's a matter of I can't use food because these two dogs will fight if I bring food out. So, I'd like to know that. And I think it's important to give our clients permission to say no, because there's always a different way to approach behavior problems. I think that's where the fine arts background is helpful to me. It's no problem to change tracks and try something else.
I'm so glad I asked that super butchered question. So I didn't think that was going to be the answer that you gave, and the answer that you gave is extremely valuable, I think, to give your clients permission to say no. And the way that you frame that to them is that if you feel and you try to operationalize what their feeling is, if you feel this, then please don't hesitate to speak up.
Yeah, I tell them, going forward with any animal professional you work with, if you get that feeling in your stomach, like, I don't want to do that to my animal, listen to that feeling, because you know your animal better than anybody else. And actually, the last person that I had this conversation with actually had a degree in psychology, and I was able to bring up the Milgram Experiment. I'm like, a lot of dog trainers take advantage of that white lab coat. People will do what you've asked them to because you come in and you're the professional, but understand, like, knowing about the Milgram Experiment, the obedience to authority experiment, which maybe you can link for people who, I'm assuming most of your listeners know that one. And that really resonated with her. She's like, I can see how that would have affected what I did with the last trainer.
I'm just thinking, imagine if some of my experiences as a younger trainer or colleagues and peers of mine who have visited the vet and been, and I definitely don't mean to say that it's not just vets, it's all people. I realise that that's a horrible generalisation to make, and I retract what I was saying just then. But being in situations themselves, I can definitely relate to that when I haven't spoken up because of, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Milgram Experiment is when they got participants to pretend to be inmates in a prison situation. Is that the one you're talking about? No,
that's another one. That's also a fascinating one. It's the obedience to authority question. It happened, in the 50s, and they were like, how could these normal people through the Holocaust go and do these horrible things to other people? And the experiment really gave some insight into our behavior as humans when an authority figure tells us to do something. So they had an actor in the other room, and they had the tester was, the person being experimented on, and then we had the person in the white lab coat, and the questioner would say, give them a question, and if the student gave the wrong answer, the person asking the question, who didn't know that it was an actor, had to give them a shock. And it started with little shocks where they just go, ow, and it worked up to larger and larger and larger shocks, to the point that the actor was not responding. And the experimenter in the white lab coat would just say, we must proceed, please ask the question again. And the actor would not answer, and they would be asked to give the shock. And people a large portion of people would continue giving the shock even after there were no sounds coming from the other room. And there have been lots of different iterations of that particular experiment, but that's the classic one. And it really illustrates, I think all of us have been in a situation where an authority figure has told us to do something that makes us feel, ugh. And we've gone ahead and done it because it's an authority figure, and it's really uncomfortable to say no. And I think giving our clients permission to say no up front is a really valuable thing for all trainers. Lily, stop yodeling.
Now that I do know that study, I didn't know it was Milgram, so thank you for that. And
I may not be remembering it perfectly. We should probably drop a link to the study. There's a good summary on Wikipedia, which I go to whenever I need to talk about it.
Right, yeah, we can definitely do that. Going back in your offerings just then, you said that there was a bit of a pivotal moment for you when you met a foster dog that you couldn't fix.
Yeah, that's there were a couple of foster dogs that I had trouble with. So the one that caused me to seek out the most positive trainers I could find at the time in Vancouver, was a Labrador. And he was just a happy, mouthy lab, and I thought, this is going to be a snap. I'll take him home, I'll teach him a few things, I'll flip him. And I got him home, and he was off the charts. He would jump and mouth and leave bruises, and I gave him his dewormer pill, the expensive one, the $20 one, and he threw it up in the kitchen, and then he guarded his vomit, and I couldn't go in the kitchen. He was super reactive on leash. He had this crazy energy requirement. And I remember showing up. The trainers did a Saturday morning free for the public, just question and answer. So I showed up there with Howie, the lab, with my gloves on, with my choke chain on him, because, good Lord, I could not control him on anything else. It's July. I'm sweating. And he's just out of control, lunging at everything. And the trainers came and took the dog from me and put him on a flat collar and worked with him a bit, and they had him calm in front of other dogs really quickly. And I was like, what magic is this? I need to learn everything that you know. So during the apprenticeship, we were required to foster dogs as part of the apprenticeship. It was a 2-year process. And I'm a bit of an overachiever, so I fostered 24 dogs in 24 months. And boy, oh boy, those 24 dogs were some of my best teachers, because there was such a variety. There were old dogs and young dogs and the litter of puppies I told you about. And the one of the litter of the puppies that I kept was the one that really humbled me. He was the one that I couldn't fix. And that was definitely a pivotal moment. And I'm glad it happened to me as a young trainer, because I teach seminars with Michael Shikashio on aggression and defensive handling all over the world now. And a lot of these folks are young trainers coming and learning from us. And some of them, you can tell, have not had this humbling moment yet. And I remember that feeling of being really sure I could fix everything. And it's all environment. And I'm going to get these puppies. So I'm going to do all of the puppy socialization, all of the early work with them. And they're going to be super puppies. And boy, oh boy, they were not. The mother had been starved while she was pregnant. It was a sibling breeding. And 8 out of the 9 puppies had some kind of behavior problem, from stranger danger to separation anxiety. And the one I kept had a particularly explosive kind of aggression that I tried everything I could think of for 18 months with him. And I ended up euthanizing him for that really explosive, unpredictable aggression. And I'm glad that happened to me early on. It's really helped me in years since then when I have to talk to clients about these difficult decisions, just having gone through it. And it was over 20 years ago, but it's still a very, very powerful, formative experience. And just learning that you're not omnipotent, just learning that there are things out there that you can't fix. I think it's better to learn that earlier than later.
And I assume that one way to learn that, and actually, let me just pause there and offer you gratitude for sharing that. I was getting emotional as you were talking.
I haven't even given you the whole story on that guy.
Do you want to give us the whole story?
I've talked about him on other podcasts. If you want to ask more questions about him, I can go through the... I've actually just done a webinar with Sue Alexander that goes through the whole story in pretty great detail. It's on making the decision for families, and I think going through a personal story of a professional trainer who had to make this really tough decision is pretty powerful for clients. So we can plug that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do that. But you mentioned there that you think that having that experience at a young age as a young trainer has value, and I know that there are young trainers in our membership, and therefore I'm going to guess that there are similar people that listen to this podcast show. So there's other young trainers who want to learn what the things that you've learnt in your career and are contemplating that move into volunteering at a shelter. What can you offer young people that might think they're how do you even say that word?
Omnipotent.
Omnipotent. What do you have to offer them? And they're at that stage. They're thinking about attending one of your events. They're thinking about going to the shelter. What kind of mindset would be of value to enter that space?
Well, I think a good mindset for any young trainer is to, and I still have this mindset, there's always more to learn. That's the fascinating thing about animal behavior is there's always somebody who knows more than you do. And to go in and think every animal I handle here has something to teach me, every person here has something to teach me. Find people who know more than you do and download all you can. But if you have the bandwidth and the space to foster dogs, boy, oh boy, I remember my first few clients as a young trainer, I was able to connect with a lot of them to some extent because I could say, yeah, your dog is guarding stuff. I had a foster dog who did that. He vomited in my kitchen and guarded his vomit. And I know that feeling of looking at an animal who's standing over something and threatening you. So I think getting to know a wide variety, if you're a dog trainer, to get to know a wide variety of different dogs in the shelter, you can really increase your empathy with your clients, because you can say, yeah, I've lived with that. And the way I picked my foster dogs, it was a shelter that euthanized when they ran out of space. So I would just go and say, who's the next one due out? And they would take me to the cage, and I would look at that dog through the cage and go, well, you think we can do this, you and me? And if I felt like it was a dog I could handle, I would leash him up and take him home and do my best with them. And actually, Howie the lab ended up, I pimped a lot of my early dogs out to friends and relatives because a lot of them were young and didn't have family yet and could put time into some of these interesting dogs I brought home. And he actually died in New Zealand. My sister took him on. She's an engineer. She did her PhD in New Zealand. And she flew Howie over with her, and he became a wonderful agility dog. She did a lot of work with him. He was always a little bit of a guarder. We never did get that completely out of him, but she did amazing work with her. And she came back from New Zealand with 2 New Zealand dogs, a New Zealand heading dog and a Border Collie cross, which she still has.
I'm glad it makes me like you more that your choice of words were that you pimped the dogs out.
I don't say that when I'm doing it, but I do enjoy flipping a dog. Like if I take a dog home to foster, I don't want to just, okay, now you know, sit down, stay. I'm going to take you back to the shelter and they can adopt you out. I like to do the pimping myself. You know, dress them up, put a nice collar on, take them downtown, put them up on social media. I can do now. And really try to keep them within my social circle, or at the very least persuade the person to become Facebook friends so I can stalk my foster dog for the rest of their life. And I have stalked a lot of them for the rest of their life, and they get to maintain contact with me as well if anything comes up. There's a few that have come back to me for boarding when their families are out of town. I'm like, yep, I already know they get along with my animals. So yeah, you can learn a lot. Like I have been really privileged to learn from some of the best in the business, but honestly, my best teachers have been shelter dogs.
Get your dog from Trish and be stalked for the rest of your life.
Get within Trish's social network and have dogs pimped to you whether you want them or not.
Well, I like the concept, like pimp out your dog, which is kind of like an MTV show called Pimp Out Your Ride, but it could be about positive reinforcement trainers helping dogs be successful at shelters. I like it. Find people that know more than you do and then create a podcast show and interview them and make it downloadable for everyone.
There we go. I am sure you have learned lots doing podcasts. Some of the big names you've had on here, I'm just amazed.
Completely selfless. It's just for me, everyone. Hey, can you share with everyone what you're doing in 2020 and where people can go to find you online now?
Yeah, so I'm Canadian, but I married a Southerner. I've now divorced said Southerner, but I kept the South, so I'm in North Carolina, which is in the southern United States, and it's not as cold as Canada in the winter. And I have my own business, McMillan Animal Behaviour. If you can spell my name, you can find me. It's trishmcmillan.com, McMillan Animal Behaviour on Facebook. And I do dog, cat, and horse behavior consulting as well as shelter consulting. And since the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of webinars for shelters who are sort of on lockdown. They've are looking to do continuing education. They can't send their staff anywhere, but I can show up and I can do a webinar on body language or defensive handling or enrichment, whatever you need. So I have also been inadvertently the co-founder of a grief support group for people who have euthanized their animals for behavior, along with Sue Alexander, a fellow Canadian trainer. And that came about when one of my last foster dogs at the end of 2018 turned out to be more dog aggressive than I thought she was. And she actually tried to kill the little dog who's been yodeling in the background during this podcast. She grabbed hold of her in this very room I am talking to you from, in my tiny house. And luckily I had my friend Kat over here, and luckily we know how to break up a dog fight, and luckily I had a break stick right out in the car, so I was able to run out, get the right tool to release the grip she had on my dog. She did $800 worth of damage, tore her ear almost in half, ripped off a dew claw, tore up the side of her face in minutes. It felt like an hour, but it was only a few minutes it took us to get them apart. And I'm really glad there were two trainers and a break stick in the like. The thing that I'm relieved about is that didn't happen in a muggle home. Like if a normal person had that happen and somebody had shown up with a smaller dog and she had grabbed them, they wouldn't have a break stick. They wouldn't know how to break that up. So the rescue group that I worked with does not adopt out dogs who want to kill other people's dogs, not even to only dog homes, because that's unfair. If they ever drop a leash, somebody else's dog is at risk. So I had Lulu euthanized, and it took me a couple of days to talk about it. I'm pretty open about stuff on social media. And on my personal page, I put a closed post, friends only, and people were pretty sympathetic, most people. But my pit bull has a page, Pibbling with Theodore, and he has 21,000 friends, which is significantly more than my business page. And they're just normal pet owners, and a lot of them did not get it, and I got a lot of criticism. I got called some things I have never been called before. I'm not going to share those with you, but murderer was one of them. That one is it's not X-rated, but my friend Sue saw all of this happening, and she felt really terrible that I was being chastised for doing what we both believed was the right thing, what the rescue group policy was. We don't send out dogs who are going to be a danger. And she said, what we need is we need a place to talk about this. Nobody talks about behavioral euthanasia. So she sent me a link and it said, Losing Lulu. And I put a picture of Lulu on the cover, and we're coming up on 2 years, and we have 7,000 members. So Sue and I have been doing a webinar series, which you can get links to on my Facebook page. I need to put them up on my regular page as well. We've done 2 so far. One just an overview of behavioral euthanasia for dogs, and one on making the decision for families, because we don't talk about dogs on Lulu who are still alive, and we have lots of people who are like in some pretty scary situations, and it's just too much for people who have euthanized to game this out. Like, they're not trainers. This is not something we can talk about. But at least we will have some resources to send people to, like, go listen to the podcast or the webinar, and it lives on my Thinkific site, and people can access that. So I'm going to continue adding offerings to the Thinkific site. I'm working on some more shelter-related offerings as well. It's the Shelter Behavior Hub, so I will put those up on McMillan Animal Behaviour as they come up.
Yeah, well, if you can manage to spell McMillan, then you can also search for Trish. I managed to spell it and stalk Trish online before this podcast episode, so you can too. But we will link to all of that in the show note. You're taking us on a roller coaster of emotions with your stories today, Trish. So thank you very much for sharing everything so far. We call that part of the podcast show hearing about people's behavioural odysseys, and you've definitely been on one. So we appreciate that. For our next question, I wanted to talk about a topic that we've literally just formed a unit for in our ATA members only Facebook group. We've already been talking about it this whole podcast show, a topic I'm personally super interested in, hence that podcast show is just for me, everyone, and an area I want to get involved with as soon as my resources will facilitate that. 18 years till summer leaves home, I think, my new daughter Trish. An area that I know a lot of members are involved with and are keen to get more involved with. Therefore, I'm super pumped that we've got you here today to already offer everything that you've shared with us and to continue to talk about working in shelters. When we caught up last week, you shared with me some really nifty thoughts and ideas about how we might build upon the great work that both individuals and teams are already doing in that industry. So, being the big fan of lists that I am, Trish, would you please share with us your thoughts here? And I believe you're going to offer us 5 things that you believe will help shelters be more successful in 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, 2020 is a different kind of year. It's it's kind of thrown us all for a loop. But one of the wonderful things that's come out of 2020 is that a lot of the dogs sitting in solitary confinement in kennels have gone out to foster. And some of the research that's come out around foster care has indicated that many of the dogs who are showing really undesirable behaviors in a shelter are much better in foster. This isn't true of all of them. It wasn't true of Lulu. She actually got worse. But because people are stuck at home, they have time, they would like some company. I really think fostering will be a big part of sheltering in the future. I think not only is everybody who listens to this podcast going to run out and foster some dogs now, but I think it's better for the dogs, and enabling the fosterers to actually do the adoptions or to pimp their dogs like I do is a really wonderful way, because there's also been some research that shows there's a significant portion of the population who will never set foot in a shelter. I'm sure those of you listening who volunteer or work in shelters you've heard this before, where they say, I could never do what you do. I would just want to adopt all of them. So they just don't go in. But if they meet a pimped out shelter dog wearing a cute bandana and an Adopt Me vest, and they are sitting in a cafe doing tricks beside you, that will often draw them in, and we can tap into a segment of the population that maybe never will step into a shelter, but they may fall for one dog that you have out. So dog pimping tips, hit me up. I am always happy to give people some input on that. So that, I think that's going to be huge. I think sheltering in general is going to move out of the shelter. We are running low on animals thanks to spay-neuter. But the problems that are coming up in shelters are around keeping animals in their homes, having access to health care for animals, which a lot of countries do a lot better than the U.S., having insurance for pets. But it was always very sad to me that somebody would come in with a dog with a broken leg and they would say, I don't have the money to fix it. I don't have the credit to get care credit to fix it. And the shelter would take the animal away and adopt them out to somebody else. And that's just so heartbreaking. Like, I think we need to find a way to help the animals stay in their homes, because some of these animals really can't do very well anywhere else. And if they're with somebody who loves them, giving them the behavioral and the medical and even just things like preventive care for fleas and ticks, maybe a bag of food here and there, I think moving the shelter out of the shelter is going to be a big part of it. So that's another big trend that I'm seeing. When I spoke in Australia last year, the theme was Beyond the Shelter Walls. So it was very exciting to sort of bring some of these ideas to a different audience. Other things that I think will be game changers in shelters, I told you about the one that just said no without me even going in, without talking to me, without finding out I was the animal person in my family. I don't think they even talked to me long enough to find out I was moving to a horse farm in the next couple of months. And I was going to have a great situation for a dog. They just said, student, no. And a big change that I'm seeing in shelters is the shift from looking for a reason to say no to looking for a reason to say yes. So starting with yes, the whole concept of open adoptions, and that was a sea change for me. They brought in open adoptions when I was at the SPCA shelter, and I found one of my screening books from the 90s. A friend said, I found this in my basement, and she sent it to me. And I had all these notes of this guy wants to adopt this dog, and his dog isn't neutered, and he's, a renter, and he doesn't have a fence. And I was just very judgmental, just looking for all of the reasons that he was not good enough for my foster dog. They had to be just like me. They had to go to training class. So I kind of turned into the monster that turned me off sheltering. But when open adoptions came in, we did all of the training, and we're taught to start with yes and have a discussion with people. And a big turning point for me was actually around a Dalmatian that came in. It was a 4-month-old Dalmatian puppy. Imagine a shelter with a 4-month-old Dalmatian puppy. There were people lined up around the block for this dog. This never happens. They had bought her from a breeder. Their older Dalmatians said, no, this dog's not staying. So they brought her to us. And I remember going down to the front desk, and I know how much exercise Dalmatians need. And I know about their special dietary needs, and I know about how much they shed. And I went to the front desk to meet the families, a mom and a dad, and like a preteen boy. And I just glanced at them, and I was like, you are not getting a dog from me, because they were clearly not the fittest family in Manhattan. And I'm like, there's not a jogger in the bunch. You guys don't look like mountain bikers. I had to take up mountain biking for my Dalmatian. But I wasn't allowed to say no. I had to start with yes. I had to have a discussion with them. So I did them the courtesy that the shelter in Canada didn't do for me. And I found out that they had just euthanized their 15-year-old Dalmatian, that they lived near Central Park, and they went there every morning for off-leash hours, every evening for off-leash hours, threw the ball for him, let him play with other dogs. They knew about how much they shed. They knew about their special dietary needs. And they got a Dalmatian to 15. Mine lived to 13. They were better Dalmatian owners than I was. And that was a real shift in my perception. It was like, just talk to people. Just treat them like humans. Start with yes. And if you think there's a mismatch, say, okay, this dog needs a lot of exercise. Let's troubleshoot how to get them that. And maybe they go to doggy daycare. Maybe you hire a walker. These guys already had a plan. But starting with yes and doing open adoptions was really a game changer for me. So that's, I would love to see more shelters take this up. Another one that I think is going to be big in the future, that I think many of the people listening to this podcast could help out with, is the concept of post-adoption support. Because when I took my foster dogs from the shelter, it was like, see you later. And they never called. They never found out how things went. They did not find out about most of the dogs who left. I mean, I was volunteering then, so I would report back. But I think it's so important for us to offer people support those first few days, having a new shelter animal in your home. And I will tell you, if you haven't fostered or adopted before, I will tell you from long experience that there is about 24 to 48 hours of, oh my God, what have I done? Just complete panic when you bring home a new dog. And that's when it would be really nice to have somebody reach out and talk to you. And yeah, he threw up in the kitchen and he guarded his vomit. What do I do? Just having a little bit of knowledge firsthand out there. The other thing that we offered was pretty low-cost training classes. And they were just drop-in rolling enrollments. So we had puppy classes and we had adult classes. And if you showed up on the correct night, whatever issue you had, whatever level you were working at, we would help you out. And I think it would be really wonderful for more shelters. Again, I think a lot of these are kind of moving beyond the shelter walls and helping animals. And the last thing I would really love to see that's not happening yet, it happened actually in Ontario, but it hasn't happened in a lot of other places, is we've got to do something about landlords. This is a big reason. If you look at the reasons animals are given up, a lot of them are given up for moving. And I know in New Zealand it's really hard to find a place to rent with a dog, because my sister had to do it. Same thing in Australia, same thing in a lot of parts of the United States. And I'm a trainer. I've always had multiple dogs since the year after I got my Dalmatian, Indy. But I make up little resumes, and a lot of them have Canine Good Citizens and different titles, and I can give them, like, this is not a normal dog. Look at all this stuff. Here's the vet records. They're on flea and tick prevention. Here's my old landlords. A lot of people can't do that. And I would love to see more access to pet-friendly housing. In Ontario, they have something called Fluffy's Law, and it's been around, I think it came out in the 90s. It was an older couple who had a really sweet cat named Fluffy, and the landlord was like, oh, this is a no pets building, you have to get rid of it. And they fought it, and there's actually a law in Ontario that landlords cannot discriminate against you for having animals. Same as a lot of them can't discriminate against you for having children. So I would love to see something like this everywhere. I mean, if the animal is lunging and biting and barking and pooping on the carpet, then yeah, you have a way to get the undesirable animals out. But if the animal's not a problem, I think allowing people to keep their pets is so much better than taking them to a shelter and bouncing them around. Like, somebody already loves these animals. Let's keep them with the animal, with their original owners. And access to affordable pet-friendly housing is so important. I was really lucky in Vancouver when I had 3 dogs to find a super pet-friendly building. And when I went to the landlord and I'm like, yeah, I got 3 dogs, he said, I have the longest term tenants of anybody I know, because people with animals, when they find pet-friendly housing, they tend to stay there. And people who are responsible enough to keep an animal alive are probably also responsible enough to hold down a job, to pay their rent on time. And it was just a wonderful building. Like, he actually insisted that you have animals to move in. And I met some amazing people in that building. I made some really good friends. And it was just a wonderful community. And I'd love to see more landlords take that step, even if it has to be legislated like Fluffy's law, so that more people can keep their pets. So I think that's fine.
Fluffy's Law is a great name for legislation regarding that. Number 2 was moving the shelter out of the shelter, and you shared this, or beyond the shelter walls. And when we caught up last week, I think it was, you shared a story with me. I'm not sure if you can share that in the podcast about a guy who's an elder gentleman who was about to lose his dog because he couldn't afford food.
Yeah, and that's a story that plays out all over the country with dogs who are seized for cruelty cases, or for neglect cases, where it actually costs more to seize the animal. This was an old guy with an old dog, and his dog was seized for being emaciated. I'm sure the old guy was probably not well fed either. And to take in a really old dog and vet them and try to find somebody who wants to adopt them when he already had a home, that sort of thing's not happening so much anymore. A lot of shelters are looking at, if the dog just needs a bag of food, it's actually cheaper for us to give the dog a bag of food once a month than to seize them and hospice them out or have them die in the shelter of old age. Let's keep the pets with the people that they're with, and that was something that there was more than one time where animals were seized, where, like, some of them really are cruelty cases. My little pit bull was owned by an actual dog fighter who was killing dogs who wouldn't fight pretty mercilessly, and the ones who did fight would get injured and put back out on the chain and breeding them in this forest chained up to barrels. So, he's still in prison. He absolutely deserved to be in prison. But some of these neglect cases where I thought we did a really good job with the hoarding cases, because New York City doesn't actually have a limit law. You can have as many animals as you can care for if your landlord allows it. And we had a pretty great way of depopulating these hoarding cases, where we'd go in with an expert in hoarding, we'd go in with a social worker to deal with the human who often had mental health needs that were unaddressed. And we'd just have a relationship. We'd show up, we'd bring in some food, we'd talk to them. We'd say, how about if we take a couple of these and get them fixed and bring them back? And once you've taken 2 of them and you've actually brought them back, they're more likely to let you take the next litter that comes out. And you can sort of gradually reduce the numbers in large-scale hoarding cases, because seizing all of the animals has been shown not to work. There's a really high recidivism rate with animal hoarding, with hoarding in general. But if you allow the hoarder to keep some of their favorite animals, or to sort of let them die of old age but not create more, you can treat the hoarder in a humane way. Because if you seize all the animals, they can get free animals on Craigslist, they'll find them on the streets, there's always a way to get more animals. So I think in general sheltering's becoming a lot more humane towards the other end of the leash, and I think that's a really positive move.
And logical. When you say it,
Yeah.
treat them kindly. Like, it's
kind of what
doesn't take.
kind of what we've been talking about with the animals. We need to do the same for the other end of the leash.
Yeah, well, it also kind of ties in a way of what shares similarities with your point number 3, which was don't judge a book by its cover. But you framed it as start with yes. Would you say that you would walk into a hoarder situation and be like start with yes? Like what?
Well, first start with yes. I'm talking about people coming to your shelter wanting to adopt animals, or coming to your rescue and saying, I would like an animal. And a lot of them are very off-putting. They're like, we have to call your vet, and we have to call 3 of your friends, and we have to go do a home inspection, and we have to measure your fence, and kind of treating people like criminals. And people who come to a shelter to get a pet are trying to do the right thing. We've been throwing this adopt, don't shop thing around, and they're coming here, they're trying to do the right thing. We need to treat them kindly. We need to start with yes. On the other hand, somebody who is treating animals cruelly, we do need to be empathetic to them if it's a mental health disorder. If it's somebody like Theodore's old owner who was actually fighting dogs, which is illegal, which is inhumane, I don't think we need to be nice to him. But I think with people like hoarders, where it's clearly really strongly linked to mental health, I think treating them kindly will actually do you more good, because I know lots of cases where shelters have gone in and seized the animals, and the hoarder disappears, pops up in another state, and starts doing the same thing again. So you're actually putting more animals at risk if you don't treat them as kindly as you can.
One thing that, once again, I've got recent pieces of content we've created fresh in my mind. So I'm thinking back to having Ken Ramirez join us last weekend, and one thing he said that I always worry about butchering other people's quotes, so sorry Ken if I get this wrong. One thing he said that is a big part of his job is just changing biases that people have. So, not training the animals, not even training the people, just like kind of changing the biases that exist. So with regards to don't judge a book by its cover and start with yes, in regards to logically, if you think about the problem of someone hoarding animals, I think without any knowledge or experience in that area, you would say, we'll take the animals away from the hoarder. Like it kind of, without thought and just like gut reaction, kind of like it makes sense. So the similarity I was drawing, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, and to put it in your words, which the podcast listeners have learnt throughout this episode are much more articulate than mine. The concept I was thinking about is just changing the bias, some of the biases that exist in the shelter, and maybe your 5 points that you've shared with us can all tie into that kind of one underlying theme of kind of shifting some of the paradigms that seem logical at first, but in hindsight don't really actually achieve the end goal.
Yeah, I think the thing to do, and as a science nerd, is go with the evidence. Like, go to the there's a hoarding consortium. I can get you the website. They've got fascinating papers on animal hoarding. Look at the evidence. So what happens when we take animals from hoarders? And can we change our behavior based on that? What happens? I bet there are a lot of people who listening to this podcast who are nodding along when I'm telling about my first experience, where I was just told no, had the door slammed in my face, and wasn't even given an opportunity to talk. That happens a lot. There's a lot of people who go into sheltering who develop really serious compassion fatigue, who are just, sometimes we go into it thinking, I like animals, I don't like people. And I'm sorry, you've got to deal with the human end of the leash, because that's who supports your shelter. That's who is taking that animal home at the end of the day. We have to learn to deal with them. And so looking at the data. So when open adoptions came around, those of us who were used to doing the 3rd degree to every single adopter, and we were told, no, you don't need to do home visits. You do not need to call up the vet, because that would take days sometimes to get hold of the vet. They come in on a Saturday, the vet's closed. We get hold of the vet on Monday. The dog goes home Tuesday or Wednesday, or maybe they'll wait till the end of the next weekend. That really reduces the number of animals we can help when we increase length of stay with arbitrary rules. But the evidence around open adoptions, the evidence around low-cost adoptions, or even fee-waived adoptions, is that people love their animals. They come to the shelter wanting to do the right thing. And we have this bias we will remember the bad things that happened. So that one person who took a dog home and they kept it in the crate and it came back with pee stains and they didn't do the right thing, we tend to make policies around these exceptions. So a couple years ago, my last Doberman passed away, and I've had Dobermans since the 90s. I took one home from that Vancouver shelter in 1999, shortly after euthanizing my really aggressive dog. And I was looking at Doberman rescues around my area, and I am not able to adopt a Doberman within 3 states if they follow their policy to a T, because there are rescues who will not adopt to people with a dog of the same sex as the one they're adopting out, so they won't adopt male Dobermans to somebody who's got a male dog. And I had 3 dogs at the time, so somebody's going to be up. I guess I was down to 2 at the time, so somebody's going to be the opposite sex. Some of them would not adopt to you if you had less than a 6-foot fence. Like, not all Dobermans can jump. I've got a 4-foot pasture fence for my animals that has a hot wire on the top so the horses don't mash it down and walk around wherever they want. Haven't lost a dog over that yet, but there was one that insisted on a padlock on the gate, which is just not practical on my farm. I have people coming and going all the time. If there's an emergency, I don't want to have to unlock the gate to be able to get out. Some of them wanted to do a vet check, and if they called the vet, they would find out that some of my really ancient animals, I took my 13-year-old cat in for her annual checkup, and I was late with the annual checkup because of COVID, so her vaccines were a few months overdue. And all I got her was the rabies vaccine. I'm not doing the kitten vaccine on a 13-year-old cat who's had many sets of vaccines for the diseases that affect young animals here. So if you called my vet, you would get an incomplete vet record there. She hasn't kept up on her shots with all of the dogs, and for some people that's a no. So there's multiple ways in which as a professional trainer who's had Doberman since the 90s, I still don't qualify to adopt from certain places. So my Doberman's from Craigslist, and she's awesome.
Do you have some kind of financial incentive in Craigslist? I'm joking.
Yeah, it's a common way to find animals around here.
Hey, we know that just because there's evidence out there, it's positive reinforcement practitioners and disseminating information to clients and to others about this information. We know that just because there's evidence doesn't mean that someone's willing to listen or someone will listen. So curious, you've shared these really, really great ideas, and we can do a podcast episode about each one of them, I'm sure. But if you're a listener of this show and you're involved in a shelter, whether it be as an employee or a volunteer, and you're whatever stage of your journey you're at, let's say that you're young and you're enthusiastic, you're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and you want to go, oh my God, I listened to this podcast with Trish and I did some research and there's this evidence, and you want to take it to that organisation. Do you have any tips for people as to how to bring these ideas into their space?
Yeah, well, I have been teaching a shelter behavior mentorship where I try to expose people to the research that's out there, and I try to be clear about what's actually research-based and what is my strong opinion, and I have a lot of those as well. But yeah, there's a lot of great websites out there. There's some organizations doing research around sheltering issues. I really recommend going to the conferences. So there might be smaller shelter conferences in your area. There's the big one on this side of the pond is HSUS Expo, which they took all online this year. There's a lot of wonderful educational opportunities. When I'm researching things that I'm going to present on, I go to all of the big sheltering websites and look at the research. So Maddie's Fund does a lot of research. They've got some wonderful podcasts up there if you want to look into some of the research around fostering. They've got some great stuff. ASPCA Pro, they've got a professional website. There are webinars up there. There's lots of the Shelter Research and Development Division doesn't exist anymore, but when we did exist, there was a lot of papers that came out of that around some of the ideas we were promoting at the time. HSUS has wonderful resources. Their Adopters Welcome program is a really great blueprint if you're thinking of becoming a little more open about your adoption programs, if the notion of starting with yes is foreign to you. I really highly recommend downloading the Adopters Welcome Handbook, which is available as a free PDF on HSUS website. And I met the people who started that program at Expo the first time I went to Expo, and it just gave me goosebumps seeing the wonderful outreach that they were doing in the communities. And they were the first ones who really got the field really thinking about doing outreach. I mean, Sue Sternberg's been doing outreach for a million years. She started with her Training Wheels program, just going around talking to people, handing out collars, handing out food, meeting people where they are. And I think that's where the field is going. I think the really progressive shelters are taking that attitude, and I think the animals are better off for it. I think just taking them and putting them in our shelters and looking for another home is not always the answer.
Well, I feel like you've already answered the final question about 5 times over. But their final question that we always ask all podcast guests is what they want to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years. We normally frame that in the animal training world for you specifically, and in line with the topics of this and focus of this episode. Let's modify that to what you want to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years in the animal shelter world. Do you have anything to add to all of the great information and offerings and strong opinions and evidence that you've offered us today, Trish?
Yeah, I think beyond the shelter walls, I think the theme of the G2Z conference was a really good one. I think that is where sheltering is going. I think it is really hard. We've been really pressed hard to rehabilitate animals in solitary confinement, and social animals do not get better in solitary confinement. It's really, really hard to make them. Like, solitary confinement will cause behavior problems. The number one risk to shelter animals is length of stay, the number one risk for behavioral deterioration. So I think all of the points that I mentioned had to do with getting them out of the shelter. And I think we're going to see more foster-based programs. I think we're going to see more open adoptions. I think we need to treat humans better than I was treated the first time I went to a shelter in order to help the most animals.
Amen. Hey, thanks so much for sharing everything today, Trish. Just before we do officially wrap up, though, I know we mentioned this towards the middle of the episode, but could you please just remind everyone listening where they can go to find out more about you online and get in touch?
Sure. My website is trishmcmillan.com. The webinars now they're online presentations I do with Michael Shikashio or through the looseleashacademy.com. I am putting new material up on my Thinkific hub, so I'm going to have more shelter behavior material going up there in the future. There's not a lot now, aside from the Losing Lulu webinars. But yeah, those are the main places. So on Facebook, I'm McMillan Animal Behaviour. If you want to follow my ridiculous pit bull who has more friends than I do, he's pibbling with Theodore. Pibbling is a verb that I made up, Pibbling, for all of the silly things pit bulls do. And I have a farm page too, which is Pibble Hill. So it seems to be mostly dominated by chickens right now. I got chickens over the last couple of years, and they pretty much bake their way into everything I put up there. They're very funny, bold animals.
Awesome. And we will, of course, link to all of us in the show notes as well. Hey, Trish, this has been a ton of fun. So from myself and on behalf of everyone listening today, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been fun to hang out with you too.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behaviour geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.